Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm not going to do it again. Guess I'll just have to tell about that part another time, but it's recording now. Um, so yeah, he didn't want to recreate that power dynamic of him from the stage telling folks what to do. Um, so I want to tell a quick story about um, something that happened in the training. So there's a handshake activity, and I'm going to actually stop the share so I can show you my beautiful illustrations. Yeah, so Theory of the Oppressed is like a series of not just like actual performances, but actually like activities, practices that we can implement in our organizing, in our activism, trainings, etc., to get folks to think creatively about resolving problems that they're seeing in their communities in the world. So I'll start with another story about something that played out during this training. So there was an activity. I'm going to show you all my beautiful drawings. So there's an activity in which there is one person who is a member of the audience, who is person A, and there is someone else who is like one of the trainers or an actor who is person B. And person A desperately wants a handshake from person B. That's their only goal, and they don't need to know why. All they know is that they need this handshake from person B. So what happens is person A goes to get the handshake, but person B very adamantly declines and just turns away, crosses their arms, not giving this handshake. So then it's the facilitator's role to ask the audience what they think of this. What would they do if they were person A? What are some ways that they could get this handshake? And the only rules are that you can't physically hurt the person, but you can mime act anything, and you can do literally anything else. And so we had some folks of the audience step in and say, I have an idea. So they step into person A's shoes and they decide, I don't know if I can see that. Yeah, they decide, oh, we can bribe them. We can pretend to have some money. So they pretend to take money out of their wallet and give it to them. And then person B pretends to take the handshake, and then they just grab the money and run away and don't actually give them the handshake. And then we had someone else step in saying, I have an idea. And they just strike them with a blunt object. So they obviously didn't actually hit them, but they pretend to hit them with some kind of object and knock them out. So for the first scenario, as you saw, person A was not successful, and they lost some money. And then with this one, we talked about it, like, was that actually a handshake? Sure, they got it, but the person became unconscious. It wasn't a consensual handshake. The other person wasn't actually shaking their hand. They were just getting their hand shook. And I thought this was like an amazing example of like kind of transferring theater into what we're trying to do with building a mass popular movement. But I'll just explain it here. Someone else decided to step in, and they don't turn to person B to get the handshake. They instead look around to the audience around them, and they shake the person's hand who's right beside them. And then that person shakes a hand of someone else beside them. And soon enough, the whole audience is just shaking hands with each other. And in the chaos of everything, person B didn't even realize that they got their hand shook by person A. So instead of focusing on like the person in power, the person in privilege, this person A like went to the people and tried to rally them together. And then in the chaos of everything, they got what they wanted from the person in power. So I just thought that was like a really incredible example of like building a mass popular movement and targeting the public as opposed to those who are traditionally seen in power. I think like that's also a good example of just how we can use theater to get folks to think creatively, to think strategically, and to actually build people's strategic capacity. Yeah, and it's a lot about like autonomy, right? So it's not just us telling folks what to do, but when we're thinking about how do we get local leaders to think creatively and strategically on the ground, because we're trying to build a movement of 11 million people. We're not going to be able to give guidance to every single local leader, but getting folks to brainstorm in their own communities how things would play out, and how they can think autonomously, strategically, and creatively. So I'm about to ask y'all for a Zoom favor. If you can turn on your microphones, so put yourselves off mute so we can hear you. We're gonna play a little game. First, am I going too fast? I can't tell what my pace is like. It's a good pace. Slow down a little. Going too slow.
No, I hear you. It's good.
Good? Okay. So I'm going to say the word yes. And when I say yes, I want everybody to say yes. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
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 Okay. Yes, so just repeat it for me. Yes.
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 No.
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 Yes, yes, yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
No, no, no.
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 Okay. Now we're gonna switch it up. When I say yes, you say no. And when I say no, you say yes. Okay? Yes?
No.
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 No?
Yes.
No, yes, no, no.
Yes. No.
Yes.
Yes.
No. Yes. Yes.
Yes, 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 no.
No.
No. Yes.
Okay. Adding another element in here. When I say up, you say down. Up,
Down.
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 Up.
Up.
Yes, no, up, down.
No. Yes.
No. Yes. Down. Up.
No, up, yes.
No.
Yes. Down.
Yes.
Down.
Down.
Amazing. You're doing great. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. We're going to go back into this. So can people see my screen again, the slide?
Yeah.
So you can turn your mics off. Thank you for participating. So a lot of theater of the oppressed is based off this idea of mechanization. And it's this idea that we have been mechanized to react in certain ways based off of language, interactions, and systems. So there are a lot of systems that will instruct us what we are supposed to do, what we can and are able to do. And like gears, like mechanically, we're supposed to respond. So this is just like a small example of that, of how our brains are wired to say, when we're instructed to say the word yes, we say yes. But if we were to flip that around, that's a process of demechanization. So what Theater of the Oppressed is largely attempting to do is get us to demechanize what we've been taught. So thinking about like what working class people are supposed to do and how we're supposed to operate, that's also something that we've been mechanized into, right? We've been mechanized that we're like not supposed to speak up for our rights, that we're not supposed to strike, take action, organize. But demechanization is about rethinking the power structures in our society and actually thinking creatively, unlocking our imagination of what we're actually capable of doing. So it's a step of liberation, right? A step of unlocking what we think we're able to do, act, etc. So I'm going to jump into this. This is maybe a little overwhelming to look at, but at the bottom here, these are our roots. So Theater of the Oppressed is concerned with the word, the image, that little thing blocked there, and sound. So these are all things that we receive, and these are ways we've been mechanized. But like we just did in the past activity, we can actually flip these on their head and rethink the words, the images, the sounds that come into our bodies, and how we can perceive them and how we can like change them and skew them to create our own understandings of the world. So things that feed into that are politics, philosophy, organizations, history. So thinking about everything around us and how those influence us through sound, word, and image. But again, we can explore other philosophies, other histories, other politics to create our own sounds, words, and image, and create our own understanding of the world and our own narrative. So that feeds into some exercises, right? We can think of games just like the one we just did as a way of flipping that on its head and demechanizing ourselves. There's image theater, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But in short, that's using like our bodies to create images and having audiences interpret them in different ways, and us challenging those interpretations and seeing what that means. And then there's also forum theater, which is what I'll focus on later on. Which is like a performance, right, a play, but in which the audience interacts and can actually step into the roles of certain actors so that we can explore what other possibilities are out there for a certain situation. And then these feed into actual forms of theater. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what those ones on the right are. We didn't go over them, but legislative theater is what I mentioned earlier about folks creatively thinking about policies that could be implemented in their communities through theater. And newspaper theater is when they actually pull stories from the newspaper and reenact them, ones that present some kind of conflict, and they creatively think about ways that it could be resolved. And most importantly, the top of this tree is concrete actions, concrete and continuous social action is the full phrase. But basically, this is not supposed to stay in theater itself. This all has a purpose that stretches beyond the space that the performance is happening in. These need to generate actual actions that are going to engage with the community so that we can see effective change in the world around us. And lastly, over here to the right is multiplication. So Theater of the Oppressed isn't meant to like be hidden in the theater. It's meant to go out to the world and be dispersed as much as possible so that other folks can use this tool to liberate their own communities. Cool. So I'll go over image theater briefly. Image theater is a way that allows communities to be able to interact and communicate across divisions. So we can think of all the divisions that happen just through language alone, oftentimes through vocabulary. So that has to do with like class and access to education. Some people may not normally be able to interact with each other. And I think what's especially relevant for our movement is language, right? We're trying to build an 11 million person movement of immigrants. And obviously we don't all speak the same language at all. And even within that, when we do speak the language, there's a variety of dialects there. So when we focus on image as opposed to language, we can think about the ways we interact non-verbally and the impacts of our actions alone. And then also as a way of like demechanizing ourselves and not just focusing on what we're actually saying, we can think about everything else that's at play with our bodies. So we can think about our facial expressions and how those communicate certain messages, our posture, how we move, all of that. So an example of image theater would be the handshake exercise that I just went over. There was like no talking involved in that. And then complete the image, which is in which one person might make a structure of themselves, like make themselves into a statue to demonstrate a story, and then someone else can interpret that image and add to it. So an example of that is like I might be picking an apple and I could do this, and then someone else could like step above me and be like pouring seeds or something into my hand, so they can engage with the image as they interpret it. And again, that's an exercise that demechanizes us. So I thought that I was creating this image of an apple, but it can force me to rethink my understanding of the situation if someone else is stepping into it. Cool. So forum theater. This is what I kind of want to focus on a little bit more. So it's a short play of a conflict that does not resolve positively for the protagonist or the oppressed. And I'll get into what that word means in this context, oppressed, in a moment. But just to give you like a brief gist of what forum theater is, the audience is not spectators, they're considered spect-actors. So they're not meant to just like sit outside and interpret, but they're actually supposed to be involved in a dialogue with the actors, with the folks on stage. And some may even step into the role of the actors and play their role and do things differently and see how the other actors interact. The joker is what's referred to for the facilitator. I'll talk about this a little bit later also, but the joker is basically present and active, but neutral. So you can think of a deck of cards that, like in many games in cards, the joker doesn't have an effect, but they are always present. And so that's kind of the idea of the facilitator, is that you're not actually trying to change the scene or what happens, but instead just push things along and make sure folks are able to engage with each other. So the joker can invite someone from the audience, one of the spect actors, to intervene. And the only hard and fast rule is that everything must stay the same. Identities, experiences, facts about the scene, but everything else is fair game. That spect actor can do whatever they want. And then after that, there's a debrief. So what would happen after the scene? And does the identity of the character matter in the scenario? And questions like that. So I think this can be probably pretty tough to understand if you've never seen it happen. And especially to do like over a Zoom call where we're not able to like test it out. So I can give like a really quick example of one of the plays that we came up with at the training. There was, let me think of one. Yeah, there was one person who told a story about how they had a green card and they were able to apply for a job that they really wanted, and they got in, and everybody pretended to be so helpful. And then like on the first day that they arrived, they got harassed. Someone left a sign on their chair saying the B word. And so then they went to their supervisor and they couldn't help them. They went to the union leader and they couldn't help them. They went to human resources, they couldn't help them. And all these people were telling them to go to the other person. And there was like xenophobia involved, sexism involved, just a total dismissal of their experience and what they were going through. So then they presented that play. And then someone stepped into their role and tried to explore if there were other options, other people they could go to. Someone tried to bring the three people together and talk with them all together so that they could like duke it out themselves. And so hopefully you can get the idea. But I think it's, hopefully this isn't confusing. But I'll step through this, go through this step by step. So this is called the dramaturgy of the oppressed, and it's a way, if folks have ever seen, I don't know if you remember, maybe like an English class or something, that they have in books, like a classic storyline might be like there's a protagonist and then there's some conflict, like the rising action or whatever, and then there's a climax where this conflict gets resolved in some way, maybe like negatively or positively, but then there's like the declining action or something like that. So this is the dramaturgy of the oppressed. It's like a variation on that. So we start here at the left with the protagonist, the oppressed, and the way there's a lot of debate around the politics of that word, oppressed, and how Theater of the Oppressed uses that word. But basically, they define it as one who fights. But they also clarify that oppressed does not necessarily mean depressed, that there's like a lot of negative connotation put on that word, but basically that word is used to just acknowledge someone as someone who fights. And the definition of oppression that Theater of the Oppressed has is that which is my right is within my reach. It should be accessible to me, but I can't access it because of who I am or where I exist in the social structure. Right, so someone who should be able to have something, should be able to have a certain right, but is not able to obtain it because of who they are or where they are. So that oppressed person faces an antagonist, an oppressor. Here at the top, there's some sort of conflict that they're not able to resolve. And over time, there's dramatic action and counter preparation. So there's something building up towards a crisis, and at the same time, there's something working against them, right? That counter preparation that's coming. They reach what is termed a Chinese crisis, which comes from the idea that in Mandarin characters, the character for crisis is actually a combination of two characters. It's the character for danger and the character for opportunity. So if you can think back to my story, right, this person who was an immigrant, who had a green card, got this job, and they think things are going fine. They're going up the dramatic action. and then they see the harassment on their chair, and that might not necessarily be the conflict, but that's definitely dramatic action. The conflict largely comes when they try to get help, and they go to all these people who said they could help them, and they're just not able to. So we can think about that as the Chinese crisis. It's both the danger that they're not able to be supported and the potential opportunity for them to find some sort of resolution. What happens here after this conflict are the alternatives, right? So this is when the spectators may potentially think about intervening. They could intervene earlier, but largely it's in reaction to the conflict because they don't know what's going to happen before it happens. So there are 3 arrows here to demonstrate that there are many alternatives, many possible solutions. The important thing to know is that when the actors are developing the play, that it must end in failure. So when you initially present the play to people, you can't present it with the solution already because then folks may not be inclined to change it, but actually present a problem that might like seem unsolvable, but then in the debrief ask the audience how they would step in and change it. Okay, so I want to bring us to one of the ways that I implemented this very recently at a Cosecha training here in San Antonio. This is something I've been like brainstorming on, and it's something I'm hoping we can apply elsewhere, like with other activities. So I'm gonna stop this share and bring us back to my beautiful comics. I'll pause for a quick second. I know that might have been a lot. Does anybody have any questions at the moment? Feel free to like barge in if you have any questions. But for now, I'm going to step into my beautiful comic. So yeah, using some of these tools, thinking about presenting some kind of play in which there's a conflict and we get the audience to engage and think creatively about solutions. I was thinking about the pyramid activity as an opportunity to present, to challenge folks to actually think about power structures and the social versus monolithic view of power. So rather than actually just like telling them straight up, which I think can be effective in many scenarios, yeah, I was just really interested in exploring how people might come to that solution on their own with some guidance and facilitation. So we have the pyramid activity. Yeah, that's my amazing art right there. But that's the pyramid. I put tape on the floor, split off into 3 sections. So hopefully folks remember the pyramid activity of having like the top, the elites, ruling class, systems and institutions, and then the people. But for now, we just have the elite. So we had one elite standing at that top triangle. And I asked folks, do they think elites just stand on their own? Do they just exist without any support? And people say, of course, no. So what holds them up? And it's systems and institutions. So we put 2 people in that second tier right below them. And the elite can actually physically like lie back, and the systems and institutions will support them. So we'll think about capitalism, like the banking system, racism, patriarchy, all these things that uphold elites in the position they're in. But then I asked, do the elites actually, or do the systems and institutions actually just stand on their own? Do banks or prisons just exist without anyone creating them? And of course the answer is no. You know, the banking system, the prison system relies on a lot of people, a lot of cheap labor, people of color, people from around the world, working class people, to support them, to keep them propped up. So you think about who cooks for everyone, who works at the bank, who built the bank, who keeps the bank clean. And those are la gente. Hopefully people can see. So then I put like 4 people in the very back, and they are supporting the systems and institutions. They're the ones that the systems and institutions rely on. And you can see that the whole pyramid is really built on la gente. So then I asked them, you know, how are they doing? The elite is obviously doing fine. They're chilling. Systems and institutions are being held up and supporting the elites. The people who are struggling are those in the back, la gente. And then I asked them to maybe think about some potential solutions and kind of guide them into thinking like, well, maybe some of them can talk to the elite and ask them just to stop leaning on them. So they try to do that. And what happens? So this is called the first potential solution I call pleading. So this is where two folks might go to the elite, and we can think about this metaphorically of like organizers focusing on lobbying. So like going to DC and asking for protections for dreamers, or some kind of like minimal temporary solutions like that. And what happens is that two people have left the bottom rung. So those two people are who are still back there have more weight on them with less support. And of course, the elite says, no, they're doing fine. They have no reason to change what they're doing. What happens next is I say, okay, so let's try another one. If you don't want to be all the way in the back, maybe you can just step one up. This I call assimilation or incorporation. So then two people from the back can join that second rung, and then they're not part of the system, the bottom tier. Ultimately, that leaves folks in the back with, again, more people to support. So you can think about folks assimilating into like the military or the police state, or any kind of law enforcement. I think it's a good example, but you can think of plenty of others of how people become complicit in those very systems that are oppressing their people. So maybe they have like a little bit of relief themselves, but ultimately leaves la gente with more people to hold up. So then I asked folks, well, what's another solution that we could think of? And that is massive non-cooperation. So instead of trying to talk to the elites or trying to assimilate into the second tier, it's actually having la gente remove themselves entirely from the system. We got them below, with a little sign that says huelga, and ideally, without anybody breaking any bones, the whole system collapses when they actually remove ourselves physically from the pyramid. So I did Emily took a little video that I can share just to show you how this plays out. Are people seeing the video? Yes, okay. So I hand out signs for folks to actually like hold on to and like kind of carry that identity proudly. And then I ask those questions, and then some other folks step in and they are holding up the leads. I think it's important to try to get folks who are like willing to like actually be physically in contact, because I think the more like the more visible it is that someone's actually leaning on someone for support, the better. So yeah, she's gonna lean back a little bit and they're gonna support her. And then we're gonna bring in la gente. And there they are. And so now la gente are gonna be supporting the systems and institutions and holding them up. And then eventually, so someone's gonna go and lobby, and then they come back, they're unsuccessful. Someone's gonna try joining right there, and they're unsuccessful because they have more pressure on la gente. And then they try removing themselves entirely. And then there's no one there to support, and the system collapses. That was just like one thing we tried out, and it ended up working pretty well. And so I'm thinking about like other ways that we can make things more interactive, and get the solutions like from the community first, before we like brainstorm actual like local actions or local campaigns. Cool. So I'm going to share my screen in a different way. So there are a ton. Can people see the slide show again?
Yeah.
So there are a ton of different exercises that can get us to where we want to be. So if folks remember this tree, right? We ultimately want to get to concrete social actions, and we can explore forum theater and all these different activities. But we can also like use different exercises to demechanize ourselves and be able to think more creatively about, planning campaigns or local actions or who we're targeting and how. And this can all happen through theater, through kind of like unlocking our imagination of what's possible. Because again, I think we oftentimes get mechanized into thinking, oh, the only solution is to write to our congressperson or to like join certain systems in some way. But we can really think radically and collectively, like actually engage with each other in a dialogue through this art form to think about what's possible that can get us to those concrete actions. But again, some of the ways that we can get there are through like games and exercises to demechanize us. So some tips for the Joker. As I mentioned, there's that yes-no game that you can practice and just get people to challenge their own perception and understanding of like how they're used to responding to a certain situation or a certain action or word. Another one is the slow motion race that I really like. We didn't actually get to play it, but basically you have a race from like one side of the room to the other, but the winner is the person who gets there last, and you're not allowed to stop moving and you're not allowed to move backwards. So you literally have to like move as slowly as possible, and that's how you win the race. And again, it's just playing with both with like how we physically engage with spaces, and that can like kind of unlock us mentally in a certain way, but also like how we think of directions and how we think of like what we're supposed to do, and just to get us imagining more creatively. And then there's some rehearsal games we can do. So when in developing like forum theater, if you want to like put on a play about a certain issue that's going on with the immigrant community locally, and like some problem that came up that you thought was like pretty unique to your community, you could actually get a group of actors to put on that play. This could be like a 5-minute play or something, 5 to 10 minutes, and then the spectators, the audience, can watch it, talk about it, and you as a Joker can facilitate them to engage with the play and step into certain roles, right? Step into the role of the person who was affected, and see what they could do to navigate the situation differently. And from there, you can maybe think about ways to organize, right? Like what you could do to resolve that situation beforehand or during. All sorts of questions that you can ask to kind of, again, get us thinking about how we can organize in a more creative fashion. But for that, like say you're developing that play, there's some games that can get us to really step into those roles. So there's the interior monologue, which is like before the play, whoever the actors are, just speak out loud everything that they're thinking in that moment, as like an external monologue, like something that's happening on the inside, but just like voicing it out into the space. And then there's also interrogation, which is an activity where like during the rehearsal of the play, audience members can raise their hands and ask someone in the play a certain question. Right. So during that play I mentioned earlier about the worker who was an immigrant and was getting harassed at their work, someone could raise their hand and ask the human resources person, like, why did you ignore their problem? And then in that moment, the human resources person would respond honestly, like how they would, not as the actor, but as the character. There's opera, where you can just shout out certain emotions and everybody has to act that emotion and see how it would play out if there were other emotions, other dynamics at play. And then there's also genre. So this, I feel like, is maybe like more of a fun thing, but you can shout out like, how would this play be different if it was a romantic comedy? And you're again playing with like tone, with character, with situational differences, and getting folks to explore like how certain situations would be different depending on the context. So then some like general tips about facilitation for the Joker. As I mentioned earlier, it's about being neutral but active. But the goals are to present problems, to show that there's not a single possibility, so not like invalidate anyone's suggestions for how to go about the situation differently, and to rehearse and problematize potential solutions. So like once someone steps into a role and they do something, actually lending space for the audience, the spectators, to challenge it, to say, well, I don't think that's what would actually happen. Or I think this could actually lead to this result, which might be more harmful for the protagonist. And then lastly, to actually generate community action. So moving beyond the potential solutions, what are ways we're actually facilitating folks to have a dialogue that moves into action steps? Which that I think Kosacha obviously like has a lot of training in doing. I think there's like another piece that I think was really important to learn from the training is that this work can vary a ton depending on who you are, who your spectators are, and what's the community that you're working in. Because I think like once you dig deeper into this and imagine things that can come up, especially in our movement, there can be like a lot of issues with folks role playing into people who they aren't themselves, right? So there's certain folks who like establish clear guidelines around this issue that can come up. And what I'll mention specifically as an example is like there's a play about homelessness in which someone who's homeless is the protagonist and cannot access the resources they need. And after the play, someone in a suit who's in the audience, a spectator, says, well, I would have done this. And they're like a fifth-term congressperson who like has a lot of money and maybe has never been homeless before. So obviously there's a problem there of they're about to step into that actor's shoes, that character's shoes, and maybe don't actually have the identity or experience that is necessary to understand what it's like to be in that situation and what decisions you can make. There was another situation where there was a short play on sexual harassment, and the person who was like playing that character was that person who was harassed. It was a young woman, and then someone from the audience who wanted to step in was this like very tall, older white man. And of course, like his understanding of how he would interact in that scene versus how someone who's like a young woman are extremely different. So some people establish like clear guidelines. There's one woman who does this, who says that you can only step in if you actually have some connection to that identity or experience that's at play. So for the person who was homeless, that might be like, have you actually experienced homelessness or like severe poverty yourself, or like some severe limitation on your access to resources, something like that, so that people have to actually like resonate, have to actually not just resonate, but actually hold some aspect of that identity or experience to be able to step in, so that doesn't become extremely problematic, in which someone who might more so hold the oppressed identity is stepping into the role of the oppressor. So I think we can definitely think about that when we're doing this work, right, in this movement, for folks who aren't directly affected to step into the shoes of someone who is. Could, of course, be very problematic, but there are also many ways to like creatively navigate that and to see what the community is open to, and just like what's the best way to move forward with this work. But that's just something I wanted to highlight as something that's like pretty important. So yeah, this just bringing us back to where we're at, and just like as a short summary, so we have words, sound, and images, and we're playing with this with the forum theater and with different activities and exercises that can come in the form of games, of image theater, form theater, and then actually creating work with that can inspire a dialogue and lead to concrete social action. There's a lot more. The main resource that I would give folks, I have a packet. I don't have a digital version, but there's a book called Games for Actors and Non-Actors. So that's Augusto Boal's book. And it's just like a ton of like the pedagogy of creating theater of the oppressed work, but also actual instructions to facilitate these games, to get folks to think outside of their bodies and imagine more creatively. But then also like some detail on like how this feeds into pedagogy of the oppressed work, of like more collective liberation work. And then the other, of course, I recommend is Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire, which talks about the actual like philosophy behind that educational model. So I've been talking for a really long time. We have 6 minutes left, and I want to open it up to questions. Questions and or things that stuck out to you / how you see this maybe being able to be implemented into our work. We could do a quick go around. So if everybody can say like either a question or something that stuck out to you, and also just like general reactions. If you're like, TBH, I don't see how like this fits in at all. Yeah, I think like all feedback, commentary is more than welcome. So yeah, does anybody want to kick us off?
I can start. Sorry, I was trying to ask a question, but I couldn't get myself off of mute. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. The first thing I just want to say is this is so amazing. I'm so grateful that you went to this workshop and that you're sharing it with us. And I think the way that you like transformed the pyramid activity is so cool. And yeah, I would love to know like what else we could do within our like curriculums or like training stuff that could do this, or like in our actions. But I guess the question that I had was like, it seems like you have to set up the scene physically to actually like be able to demonstrate like realistically the results of each solution. Does that make sense? Like for the pyramid, like, because you'd have to show, I mean, your goal was to show that non-cooperation like is a really powerful tactic. And so that's why you had like all the folks leaning on each other. I guess I was just thinking like there could be a situation where like people play out a scenario where like lobbying works and then it would kind of like work against us or something. So it just seems like you have to create this scene like architecturally so that like you're really like how scenarios would play out in real life, like you can actually demonstrate there. Does that make sense?
Do you mean like with the pyramid activity or with any form theater?
I think with any, I was just thinking particularly about the pyramid activity because like it was just one of the examples and like it's an activity that we're familiar with. But yeah, I think with any activity it just seems like there has to be like a lot of work to like to set it up so that it's both like open-ended and there's like room for creative solutions and like people could actually see how non-cooperation, for example, would be a solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think like disclaimer on the pyramid activity is that like it's definitely not form theater, because we're ultimately like trying to guide them into the solution ourselves. I think it's like a mix of like trying to generate the solution from the people, but also like knowing what we think the solution is. Because form theater is largely about like they don't actually have the solution in mind. Like they're actually like genuinely looking for the solution to come from the community.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So like with like the worker example that I gave with the worker who was getting harassed, like the actors and the director of that play like don't actually have a solution. They're like genuinely curious to know what the audience comes up with, to see like what they would do and how they would resolve it. Whereas like for the pyramid, we like already feel like massive non-cooperation is the way to go.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So
Yes.
you're just rehearsing possible solutions that people would give, but like it's really just whatever happens in the moment, like you facilitate.
Yeah, and with form theater, you don't actually I don't think that you don't actually rehearse like potential solutions that the audience would give. It's like all improv. So there are like a lot of rehearsal games so that people can think about like what's their motivation, what's their like objective, so that people do something that would probably be like realistic, depending on what the audience says, like things that are like genuine reactions for that character. But yeah, none of it's rehearsed. It's like all improv, depending on what the audience member does once they step in. Yeah, so like I think that could like function on like a very local level. If there's something happening with like a driver's licenses campaign where like a certain legislator isn't listening to the demands of the people, and then they could create a short play about like what is happening in the community, and why that person isn't listening, who are the other people who have like stake in this issue who aren't reacting in a way that's like leading to resolution, and actually creating like a short play to act that out, and then seeing how folks would step in and maybe organize certain people or talk to certain people, and like what they would do strategically to win licenses for the community. Might be an example in which like Cosecha helps facilitate communities to like actually develop the solution on a local level themselves. Any other questions? I know it's already 3 p.m. So if other people have calls or something, you may have to go, but I'm free. So I don't got anything to do. So if anybody has questions or wants to continue a go around of anything you took away, question, ideas for how this could be used, would be great.
Hi, it's Heidi. Just have questions. Thank you for putting this presentation together, Jonathan. It's very helpful. Just wondering if you had a website where we can go and see how to facilitate this kind of exercises, how to draft a scenario, let's say if we give it out, or yeah, like is there, and also like the book that you mentioned, is it accessible in any website that you have it that we can recover?
I will look. I will ask them and look. I know the book itself is kind of expensive, but I imagine they might have like a digital version of what they gave me on paper and could give it to me. The website that they have is tonyc.nyc. I'll put it in the chat here. But they have like a lot of interesting things, and they have like full videos actually you can watch. I think that would be really helpful for folks to see, as they like have fully recorded videos of them doing like homelessness, like theater focusing on homelessness in New York City. And so you can actually see like how people facilitate and how they do the debrief and how the actors and spect actors work and all of that. So those are like long, because it's full sessions, but I think that could be cool to check out. And I will ask if they have resources that I can like share with y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Cool. I'm just curious if we can do like a really quick go around, just so I can know how this training was. And yeah, and just like what people are taking away from it, or things they're like curious to learn more about, just so I know, I can like share with more people. Yeah, so Ale, Serena, Jackie, Camila, Juanse, Emily, who wants to like share real quick?
I can start. Yeah, thank you. The level of like care and way you facilitated this was really amazing. So thank you for taking the energy and time to do this, Jonathan. I'm Wait, what was this? What do you want to know? Sorry.
just like what's sticking out to you, any questions you have, ideas about is to implement.
Yeah. Oh man, I think I feel like this type of work like really excites me and really overwhelms me. Just like the role of like art in building a movement. I just have such big. It brings up a lot of questions. So you want to talk? Hey, yeah. So nothing specific. Just
Like
big
can
questions.
it actually work kind of questions.
I don't want to see that because I believe yes, but it's like what is like more specifically like what is the role of like what is like how like more into the how than the like can it.
Yeah.
And I think it just like makes me think about like just the need of like people who really like are excited by like this part of like movement building, like people who I don't know, like artist is such like a I don't know, everyone's an artist, but also like there are some people who are just like really driven by that. So people who are like really driven by like creativity, like they're like really like the need for people who are really driven by like being an artist or calling themselves an artist or being creative or whatever in the movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally feel that. I think like, and it's probably like some new thoughts to you, but just to like voice it out. It's just like this, I think of this like just as a tool. Like I feel like I've definitely encountered spaces where they try to like force arts into the planning in ways that just like really aren't helpful, and kind of like stall the process. But it's like for the sake of like being creative or expressive or artistic. But ultimately, like there are situations for a really quick PowerPoint, like that's just like efficiently get information across. And then there are also situations that call for something like that touch us more deeply and emotionally, and get us to engage with each other on a deeper level and creatively. And this can be helpful for that. So I think these are like all tools that can be used. But yeah, I am like wary of like some spaces that just like force art into situations where it's not useful. But yeah, we can talk. Yeah. Anyone else? I know it's our 306, so we can like get a couple more. And if you have to hop off, feel free. But it'd be great to get like feedback on like what's sticking out to you and whatnot, or questions. Yeah, anything. Jackie, Camila, Heidi, Ellie, Ale, Kong, wow.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I'm just remembering like how I saw everybody's faces like while they were doing this here. So it's just great to see it and then to listen to everything that you shared with us today. So yeah, I just think it's amazing how using art can really have people be more engaged and just be interested and feel like they're taking ownership.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that's a big part of this is like, I think engagement can be like a really tricky thing, especially when we're like presenting a strategy to a community that we might be new to. So I think like just like generating a dialogue from folks and having folks actually feel comfortable stepping in, like challenging their instinct, certain things in ways that like force them to like challenge their own understandings of the situation. I feel like this could be really valuable for that because I feel like we've all been in those scenarios where we like step into a space, give the Cosich a PowerPoint, we don't like 101 training, whatever, and it's just dead silent. And we don't actually know if it's like vibing with people or not, or what they're thinking. And yeah, and people might just like nod their heads and say, okay, but we don't actually know what people are feeling. So I think this can be like potentially useful to like have folks engage like right off the bat so that they feel comfortable engaging in a dialogue that's like more fruitful for learning. Thank you. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Like feedback, like anything that felt missing that you wish I like had touched more on, or just like, yeah. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay, hey, this is Ellie, but I'm on Jonathan's whatever. I'm interested in how this can be incorporated. Wow, this is so bad. My computer's still making the noise. How can we incorporate this into like actions as well as trainings? Or do you see this as like specifically a trainings tool?
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know. I think this is like a planning tool. Because like the ultimate objective is like concrete and continuous social action. So I think this can be really good for like developing the action or the campaign or the strategy. But I feel like positive that like there are certain, like whether through the exercises or the games, or even maybe the play itself, that could even be like staged publicly. Like I've seen that in like some organizations I used to work with back in Boston, of actually like folks talking about like gun violence. Yeah, as a seed project, use theater in their actions. It's part of Theater of the Oppressed. Probably. I'm actually like, I don't remember. Maybe Heidi or someone can talk about that. But yeah, I think we've probably all seen like public theater in that way, and that also encourages a dialogue with the public.
Serena, is the thing that you're talking about with the seed project like the abuela situation, right?
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, there's also a really amazing video I saw recently that was like focused on the Dreamer movement, but my friend Amy Leon was involved in it. I'll try to find it and send it to you. But it's just like this incredible public theater piece with like probably like 50 or 60 people in New York. Yeah, that just like portrayed in like a very artistic way the like blockage of immigrants from being able to feel safe. Yeah, I'll try to find that and send it to y'all. Cool. Anyone else? I don't want to keep people too long, but I don't have a life, so free to
You're doing good, Jonathan. You're doing amazing.
Ale, Camila.
I don't think Camila's actually on the
Okay. Ale. All right. Well, if anybody has any other feedback or thoughts, just like ideas you want to bounce, yeah, thank you, Ale. Ale says, gracias, Jonathan. It's very helpful. Yes, we need more art in our movement. Yes. Yeah, I think like it can be overused, but I also feel like I've seen like a number of instances where, or situations where like it can, it's just like not known as a need. Yeah. Sometimes like I mentioned that scenario where it's like a room that's silent, we don't actually know what the space needs, but I think oftentimes it can be art that like really pulls people in to like think on an emotional level, but also like creative level about the strategy we're pursuing. So thank you all so much for joining and listening to me blabber for an hour. And yeah, if you have any more questions, and I'll send you the video and the resources, I'll put those in the Slack. And yeah, thank you all so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Jonathan.